A dead man flew from Cairo to Paris, and to let him board that plane, Egypt issued a 3,000-year-old corpse a passport. The name typed across it was Ramesses II. Nationality, Egyptian. And under the line marked occupation, one impossible word. King. Beside it, colder still, deceased. He had been dead for more than 3,000 years. And a modern government still filled out his paperwork as if he might need it. When the plane touched down in France, the pharaoh was met on the tarmac by a full military guard of honor. Soldiers stood at attention. Trumpets. The reception owed to a visiting head of state. It simply happened that this particular king had died in the Bronze Age, and arrived lying in a climate-controlled box. To understand how a corpse earns a welcome like that, you have to understand what this man was to the people who built him, and why, 3,000 years later, they still could not bring themselves to treat him as simply dead. Ramesses II ruled Egypt for 66 years. Think about that. Most Egyptians alive during his reign were born, grew old, and died having never known another king. He outlived his own crown princes. A dozen of his sons died waiting for a throne they would never sit on. To his people, he was not a man who happened to be in charge. He was a permanent feature of the universe, like the river or the sun. We call him Ramesses the Great, but the title undersells it. For the ancient world, he became the template of what a pharaoh should be. 9 later kings took his name hoping to borrow his shine. Centuries after his death, Egyptians still spoke of the age of Ramesses the way we speak of a golden age that will not come again. He did not just rule his time. He colonized every era that followed. And he was, by law and by faith, a living God. His face was carved into cliffs. His statues rose 70 feet into the air. He had himself sculpted 4 times over, colossal, seated, staring across the desert into the sunrise, built so that twice a year the dawn light would reach into the mountain and fall directly on his face. Everywhere a person looked in Egypt, Ramesses was looking back. Imagine being that man. Imagine growing up being told, and believing, that you are not merely a king but a deity in flesh, that the sun rises because your dynasty holds the world in order, that your body is the hinge the cosmos turns on. It does something to a person. When everyone around you treats your every word as divine law, the line between the man and the myth dissolves. Ramesses did not just claim to be eternal. He was raised, from childhood, to feel it as fact. He understood something rulers still spend fortunes trying to learn. Power is not only what you do. It is the story people are told about you. He marched against the Hittites at Kadesh and fought a battle that was, at best, a bloody draw, an ambush that nearly cost him everything. He came home and carved it across temple walls as the single greatest victory in human history. Ramesses, abandoned by his own soldiers, surrounded, turning the entire war by his own hand. He wrote his legend into stone. And stone does not argue back. Later he did something no pharaoh had done. He signed the world's first recorded peace treaty with those same Hittites, a document so balanced both empires could call it a win. He fathered something like 100 children. He built a whole new capital city and stamped his name on monuments other kings had made, erasing them to magnify himself. He took the name Ramesses and forced it to mean one thing: permanence. He wanted to be remembered. So he built his immortality out of granite, because granite lasts. But granite was not what saved him. What saved him was something far stranger, and far more fragile than stone. When Ramesses finally died, in his 90-something years, his body worn down by arthritis, his teeth abscessed and rotting, they buried him like the god they believed he was. Sealed in gold in the Valley of the Kings, surrounded by everything a soul could need to go on living. It did not last a century. Egypt slid into decline. Tomb robbers tore through the royal graves, ripping the gold from the dead, stripping kings down to the bone. The very treasure meant to protect Ramesses in the afterlife became the reason men came to defile him. And so the priests of a later, poorer age made a quiet and desperate decision. To save their god-king from thieves, they took him out of his own tomb. They moved him. Again and again. They rewrapped his body, scribbled notes on his coffin like a shipping label recording where they had hidden him and when, and smuggled him through the dark from one hiding place to the next. At last they lowered him into a cramped shaft in a cliff at Deir el-Bahari, packed in beside dozens of other pharaohs. The greatest kings Egypt ever produced, stacked together in a hole like refugees, hidden from their own people in order to survive them. There is something almost unbearably tender in it, if you stop and look. Priests who worship this man as a god spent generations not praying to him but hiding him, carrying a decaying body through the night, patching his wrappings, writing careful little notes about where they had stashed the divine so grave robbers wouldn't find it. Their god needed protecting. Their god could be stolen. And still they would not let him go. And there they stayed. For nearly 3,000 years, the most famous king in the world lay forgotten in a crack in a cliff, while empires rose and fell above him. Until, in the 1870s, a local family stumbled onto the cache, and quietly began selling relics of history's greatest pharaohs on the black market. Objects with royal names surfaced in the antiquities trade. Officials followed the trail back to the shaft. And in 1881 they climbed down into the dark and found them, row upon row of Egypt's kings, Ramesses the Great among them, his arms crossed over his chest, his face, after 3,000 years, still recognizably a face. When they later unwrapped him, the story goes that his arms suddenly rose, muscles contracting in the open air, as if the old king were reaching up one last time. He had wanted to be seen forever. He got his wish, just never the way he pictured it. For decades he lay in a glass case in a Cairo museum, a tourist attraction. Then, in the 1970s, scientists noticed the unthinkable. Ramesses was decaying. After 3,000 years of near-perfect stillness, a fungus had taken root in him and begun to feed. The body that outlasted the Bronze Age was quietly losing to mold behind glass. Egypt did not have the means to save him. France did. And so it was decided, the pharaoh would fly to Paris. But French law made no exceptions. Anyone entering the country, living or dead, required identity documents. A corpse could not cross a border. Only a person could. So Egypt made him a person again. They filled out the forms. They issued the passport. Occupation, king. Deceased. And a nation that had spent 3,000 years unable to fully bury this man proved it one final time. They treated a dead body like a living head of state, because to them, deep down, he had never entirely stopped being one. In Paris they scanned him, studied him, treated the fungus with radiation. And they read his body like a diary, the old battle wounds, the arthritis that bent him, the shock of red in his hair, the abscess in his jaw that may have finally ended him. Then they wrapped him again and flew him home, healed, to a museum in Cairo where he lies today. Think about the absurd beauty of that scene. In a sterile European lab, men in white coats bent over a Bronze Age god, arguing over his X-rays, treating his infection, worrying about his comfort as if he might complain. A being who had been worshipped as the sun's own son was now a delicate medical patient, and everyone in that room played along, because some part of us insists that a king remains a king even when he is nothing but linen and bone. And here is the strange, human thing sitting underneath all of it. Ramesses spent his entire life at war with death. He carved his name into mountains. He raised statues to outlast the sun. He wanted to be a god who never truly died. And the astonishing part, the part we never quite say out loud, is that it worked. 3,000 years later a modern government stood on a runway and saluted his corpse. Signed his papers. Called him king. We tell ourselves this is about respect. About history, about honoring the great. But watch what we actually do. We embalm them. We build them marble rooms. We stand corpses upright, sign their documents, will them across borders under guard. We behave, again and again, as though the most important people simply cannot be allowed to be gone. Because we do this, we can carve a person's name deep enough into the world that even their body keeps its rank. We give the powerful dead passports and honor guards, glass cases and names we refuse to stop repeating, not because the dead need any of it, but because we cannot stand to admit that the story is over. The pharaoh wanted to live forever. What he got was stranger. He became a body the living can never quite let die, a king we keep signing paperwork for, 3,000 years after there is anyone left for him to rule. So here is the question worth sitting with. When we refuse to let our greatest dead actually die, the tombs, the statues, the names we carve and recarve, who are we really keeping alive? Them? Or the part of ourselves that cannot bear the thought of being forgotten? Follow for more.